Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. In this installment, the third installment of the series, The Philosophy of Hip Hop, what I'm going to discuss today is the idea of gangsterism, and also the OG, original gangster. It sounds a little corny, right? If you're not familiar with hip hop culture, to talk about OGs or gangsterism or being gangster. And the question is, what does it mean, right? What I've been attempting to do throughout all these videos is to offer at least my interpretation on some of what I feel are the seminal, foundational, the most basic concept to understanding hip-hop and hip-hop culture. And a lot of these ideas are spoken about in contemporary society, but people don't really have an understanding of how these ideas came about, right? They don't really understand how the ideas communicate a certain sense of meaning among members of the culture, so that you might hear someone talk about gangster or being gangster, and if you're outside of the culture, you might think that they're talking about gangbanging or violence. And it could be the case, and sometimes it is the case, that references to gangsterism or being gangster is a direct reference to violence, but in this video I'm not going to talk about gangster in that sense. Primarily because I don't believe that the idea of being a gangster, right, the idea of being a gangbanger affiliated with a gang is an inherent or seminal concept in hip-hop, right? I think the idea of being gangsta is, right? I think the idea of the OG is the original gangster, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. I think that that is seminal. So this isn't going to be my analysis of sort of gangbanging in hip-hop. In no sense am I doing that. What I am trying to do is I'm trying to discuss the concept and the meaning, as always, behind the claim of gangsta, and also understand the role that OGs play in the hip-hop community. Okay, with that being said, I just want to, I deliberated before I did the video whether or not I was going to recite this this verse, and I'm not going to recite the verse in its entirety. But I felt like it was important that I do recite the verse in order to show what I feel is the genius might be a little too strong of a term, but just the amazing perception that some rappers have. Not all, but some rappers have. And this is a classic track in hip hop. It's one of my all-time. It's probably my top 5 favorite rap tracks of all time. It's Ghetto Boys, Straight Gangsterism. And the first verse is Big Mike, right? So Big Mike comes on and he gives the first verse, and it's one of the most compelling verses, as far as I'm concerned, in hip-hop history, period. Now that's a huge claim, right? The whole idea of and motivating, governing this entire lecture that I'm doing for video number 3 on gangsterism is indebted to that verse by Big Mike, right? So what I'm going to do is just give you parts of the verse, and then we'll refer back to it later, and you'll see. So the verse goes like, it starts like this, right? 7 years old, I'm looking up to the gangsters in the hood, because to me and my cousins, they represented good. Okay, so it starts off, kid 7 years old, he's looking up to the gangsters in the hood, because to him and his cousin, the gangsters represented good. Everything you need to know about straight gangsterism, about the idea of being an OG, about being gangster, somebody says, man, that's gangster. Right, so you might be wearing a nice pair of clothes. They'll say, "Man, that's gangster." Or you do something that's hard to do. Man, that's gangster. What does that mean? Big Mike, both figuratively and literally, situates himself as a 7-year-old child, right? In this narrative that he's weaving, right? 7 years old, I'm looking up. He's figuratively looking up to the gangsters as so far as they're his role model, right? So, on a figurative sense, he's looking up to the gangsters. Insofar as they're his role models, right? I'm looking up to the gangsters in the hood. But literally, because he's 7 years old, he's literally looking up to the gangsters, right? He's looking up to the gangsters in the hood because to me and my cousin, they represented good. The point of the representation of goodness, and I'm not going to do a very precise blow by blow of the verse, but I'm going to go through some of it, because all of this is going to help explain the concept of gangster. And no one does it better than Big Mike, period. They represented good. Why the addition of representation of good? Well, obviously, what he's implying in there, without explicitly saying it, is that there's a counter representation, right? 7 years old. I'm looking up to the gangsters in the hood, because to me and my cousin, yeah, they're represented good. Why? Because to us, within our community, these OGs, right, these old school gangsters, right, and in another video I'll talk about the old school, but these old school, these original gangsters represent good. They don't represent what the media and society say they represent. Drug dealers, gangbangers, pimps, and so on and so forth. Bad elements in society, in the community. He immediately tells you in that one sentence, right, that figuratively and literally, I am looking up to this new role model. And these role models aren't like the representation that's depicted in society of being bad guys and villains. These role models are actual depictions that I attempt to emulate, right? So, 7 years old, I'm looking up to the gangsters in the hood, because to me and my cousin, yeah, they're represented good. Even when we played cops and robbers on the block, right? So even in our recreational activities as a 7-year-old kid, even when we played cops and robbers on the block, nobody wanted to play the cop, okay? So even when we played cops and robbers on the block, right, nobody wants to play the cop, right? So you immediately recognize that he set up this antithesis, right? You have the gangsters and the people that he look up to, and they represent good. Nobody wants to play the cop. Leads us to believe that the cops are something that you don't want to be like, right? They don't represent good. He doesn't say that, but they don't represent good, right? They're not something that you want to be. They're not somebody that you look up to. You look up to the gangsters. They represent good, right? So there's a lot in the first few words in that. It's profoundly deep, right? Which is why it's one of my favorite Straight Street Gangsterism, is one of my favorite tracks of all time, right? So even when we played cops and robbers on the block as kids, nobody wanted to play the cops, right? Because the cops were weak. He doesn't say it. He says something vulgar, but I can't say it, right? Because the cops were weak. They were whack. They were not what we wanted to be, right? Nobody wanted to play the cop, because the cop was a... And if you played the cops, you got your ass kicked, right? So if you played the role as a cop in a game as a young child, you were getting your ass kicks, right? So it's sort of like, you can imagine, like, generations before us, it was cowboys versus Indians, right? In current generations, and still to this day in current generations, the games that you play are cops and robbers, right? Or more explicitly, cops and OGs, right? Cops versus the gangsters, right? The gangsters in the hood. Nobody wanted to play the cop. Now, the thing that he does next is amazing, right? He's emulating. Big Mike is emulating through the eyes of a 7-year-old sort of the demeanor of the gangsters. So he says, cigarette, this is what the gangsters have now, right? Cigarette in one hand, a drink in another, right? So he's watching from a low position, cigarette in one hand, drink in another, leaning to one side, cooler than a mother, right? So you can see how the gangsters are influencing and influencing and creating an impression on the mind of this 7-year-old boy, the character that Big Mike creates, right? He creates the narrative of this young 7-year-old boy looking up to the gangsters, and he talks about he wants to emulate them as his role model, but he's a very, very perceptive, right, as a child, right? Cigarette in one hand, drink in another, leaning to one side, cooler than a mother, right? Then he gives the names with those gangsta-ass nicknames, right? So then he goes through all the nicknames. Little Lane. True. Side driving a 73 caddy. Alright, so what he says then is he has a woman on the side driving this Cadillac, chauffeuring him around, right? Driving a 73 caddy with a chrome-plated 357, right? Ready to send somebody on the stairway to heaven, right? I was fascinated. Yeah. Now listen to this part, right? This is important. And I can't obviously go through the whole song because it's riddled with profanity, right? I was fascinated. Yeah. I let him influence me, and my mama hated it. But she still gave me love because my mama understood that it was in my blood, right? Mama understood that it was in my blood. What is it, right? Gangsta. Gangsta was in my blood. See, it was a cycle, right? See, it was a cycle. And in a few more years, she wouldn't have to worry about a Michael. She's not going to have to, mommy's not going to have to worry about this little 7-year-old boy. See, it was a cycle, and in a few more years, she wouldn't have to worry about a Michael because I'll be making my own decisions, right? I'm independent, making my own decisions. Coming up fast, clocking cash, straight gangsterism. Epic track, epic first verse. I mean, flawless, right? What's the significance of me going through Big Mike's verse, right? Why take all the time to, I'm filtering out all the profanity, but why take all the time to go through and explain almost painstakingly, blow by blow, what Big Mike's saying? Well, there's a lot in it, right? I think in that verse, you understand hip-hop, right? You understand the culture. And again, when we're talking about hip-hop and we're talking about the philosophy of hip-hop, it's only incidental, this music, right? The music is incidental. The music is nothing more than a means of representing and expressing the concept of ghetto, poverty, oppression, right? And all the videos that we've been doing, we see how these ideas of poverty, of oppression, of ghetto translate to a wider audience. What's very interesting on a quick side note, and then I'm going to get back to the discussion of gangsterism, but I just thought of it and I do need to address it. I was looking on Yahoo the other day, reading an article, and it said that 1 in 7 Americans live below the poverty line. 1 in 7 Americans live below the poverty line. This was like September 15th or so. I saw the article and I read it. So if you think about the idea of 1 in 7 people, 1 in 7 people living below the poverty line, this idea of ghetto, this idea of oppression, this idea of sort of the suppression and the dangers that are affiliated with poverty isn't going to be so much of an underclass problem anymore, right? The things that I'm going to be talking about, if this continues, I hope it doesn't, is going to be more widely understood to more diverse group of people. Because as poverty spreads, the ghetto spreads, right? The ghetto becomes larger and larger. And the things that I'm talking about, which is so alien to so many of you, and I'm glad that all of you guys are watching, and I appreciate all the positive feedback that I've gotten from these videos. Unfortunately, it's going to become more and more real, right? I hope that it remains alien, that I have a reason to do these videos because most people don't understand. I hope it isn't the case that everybody starts to understand what Big Mike means when he says gangsta, right? When he says it's in my blood, right? I know that's what I'm going to be. It's a cycle and I recognize it. What does he mean? What does gangsta really mean, right? When somebody says that, right, yo, that's gangsta, man. Yo, I'm gangster, man. When I do my thing, I'm gangster with it. Is it really meaning that you're claiming a set, you're throwing up signs, you're tagging? What does it really mean? For me, it means what Big Mike says. That's gangster, right? That's what hip-hop gangster is the embodiment of. And it's a cycle. This idea of being gangster is a cycle of the structure in the inner city. And it's specifically, at least from my perception and my perspective, I'm sure there's a feminist perspective, but to be fair to the feminist account, I don't feel like I can voice that account. I can only voice the account that I know. And it's a story from an older black man who has become an OG to young black kids who are trying to be that OG, right? So it's a story specifically from one generation of black men to a younger generation of black men. It's not to say that you can't include women in this discussion, or you can't include other minorities or white men in the discussion. I think that you can, but I think to stay pure to the idea of being straight gangster on sort of that Big Mike level, right? It's specifically a tale told from one generation of black men to another generation of black men. So let me tell you this tale. The way that you think about it, right? A 7-year-old boy looking up to gangsters in the hood. You have to think that the representation of good that a young boy in the ghetto has of these black men can't be one properly stated where the black man has gone off to college, he's come back to the projects, because usually the case is that a black man goes off to college and he leaves the projects. So the very fact that he's remaining in the projects lets you know that he may have left, but he's still in the projects. And the question is, well, where could he have gone? Well, the answer is obvious, right? There's only one place he could have gone. The only place he could have gone and returned to is he went to prison and came back. And the question is, well, what did he go to prison for? And you pick your list, right? For any number of things he could have gone to prison for. But the thing is that he never abandoned, right? The gangster never abandoned the hood, right? He remained where his roots were. He stayed in the ghetto, in the impoverished community, despite the fact that either through pimping or through selling dope or through whatever illegal means he had made money, he could have left, but he stayed in the hood. He stayed in the ghetto. The gangster stayed there, right? Even when he has money, he's still at ground zero. And the young boy see this, right? The young boy sees the relationship that this older man has, right? He may himself not have a father. He may himself not have older male role models. So he looks to the young boy looks, as Big Mike says, right? The young boy looks to the gangster for his cues. And the question is, well, what are those cues, right? And that's why I love the song so much, right? This is an epic, epic, epic track, right? The young boy's watching, and the gangster knows the young boy's watching it. So what does the gangster do? Cigarette in the hand, drinking another. He's leaning. He's got his hat tilted a certain way. He walks a certain way. He talks a certain way. He carries a certain swag. In another video, I'm going to talk about the death of swag, right? You know, what swag meant when I came up is different from what swag means now, right? But I'll talk about swag in a different video. But the older, that OG had a certain swag, right? And the sense of swag that I came up with, right? Because this thing is in his blood. It's not something that he manufactures. It's not something that he does to try and fit in, right? The gangster, the original gangster, doesn't go out there and try to be like somebody else, right? It's not the case that he has tattoos. I mean, I'm pretty tatted up, but all the tats that I got over the course of since 94 to last year. It's been years in the making, the tats, right? It's not like you just, like some, and I'm not knocking young boys who do this now, right? But the young boys who go out there, they get some money, they get $2,000, $3,000, and they get a whole sleeve, a whole body, arm and neck, all that done in a weekend, right? I'm not knocking it, and I'm definitely not a hater, but is it gangster? I don't know if I can say that that's gangster, right? It's a story to be told. And the young boy, the 7-year-old boy that Big Mike is looking up to, that Big Mike is talking about, looking up to the OGs, the young boy is watching him, right? And it's not something that he does at any given moment, right? It's not, oh, he left and he got a new car. Oh, he left and he got some new tattoos. Oh, he left and now he has ice or diamonds or whatever it might be. The young boy sees the history, sees the cycle, right? Sees the cycle. And the fact that Big Mike introduces that idea is provocative, right? It's very deep. On that level, I think it's not necessarily intuitive. I don't think that level is simple at all. I think that level is pretty deep just to begin with, right? We're already at sort of like a pretty foundational account, right? Of what Big Mike is getting to in his discussion of the OG, of the gangster, right? It's the relationship between an older black man and a young black boy in the community. On a deeper level, though, if you look at some of the tail end of the verse, right, he goes, and in a few more years, you wouldn't have to worry about a Michael, right? And in a few more years, she wouldn't have to worry about a Michael, because I'll be making my own decisions, right? Because she's not gonna have to worry about a Michael, because I'll be making my own decisions, coming up fast, clocking cash, straight gangsterism. So the question on a deeper level is, okay, we understand that there's this relationship, right? And it's a very beautiful relationship that he captures. The relationship between an older black man and a younger black kid. And assumingly, it's not his kid. It's just another kid. Older black man, younger black kid. The older black man knows, right? The OG knows that the young boys are watching him, right? He knows that the young boys are emulating him. He knows that the young boys are trying to be like him, right? And the question is, does he do anything in his power to prevent the young boy from becoming who he is? Does he have remorse for who he is? And the answer in the verse is no, he doesn't, right? It's not a tale, right? Big Mike doesn't tell you the tale of being a gangster. You know, you'll see this old cliche story in Hollywood all the time, right? Young boy wants to be a gangster, sees older man, young black guy come out of prison, and the guy has nothing but tales of lament and sorrow, and the young boy refuses to hear that story, and he goes off and makes the same mistakes that the older black guy makes, and only not to have learned, and comes back in the ghetto and he's all remorseful himself. That's not the story of a gangster. And first of all, not only is that not the story of gangster, that's not gangster, right? That's not gangster. The story of gangster is the guy, you know, you can imagine that the guy has done his time. He's obviously learned from his experience in the penitentiary, right? He's learned from the wrongs that he's done, but in no sense is he telling the young boy not to do what he did. Now that's deep. It's not like I did wrong in my life. I did a lot of bad things in my life. Learn from me and don't do the same bad things. That's not the story of Gangsta. That's not the story of Gangsta at all. The story of Gangsta is you can watch me as much as you want, and I can tell you till the cows come home not to do what I did, but when it comes down to it, I'll be making my own decisions. Coming up fast, clocking cash, straight gangsterism. The gangster knows the next generation is going to make their own decisions. It's not for me to be here preaching to the new generation, telling y'all what to do, go to school, eat your greens, make sure you look both ways before you cross the street. It's not about that. It's not about that. The story is, it's hard. And to be gangster on that level, you sort of detached from sort of the moral obligation, which is insane, right? But on a real level, you're detached from the moral obligation of having to raise this next generation of young gangsters, right? How do you raise the next generation of young gangsters? You don't raise them. You just do you. I'm going to do me, right? I'm going to do me. You know, however, that they're watching you, right? Right? Cigarette in one hand, drinking another, leaning to one side, cooler than a mother, right? He knows that they're watching him, right? The gangster knows that they're watching him. So the way that you teach as gangster, right? The way that you teach as an OG isn't to sit down and say, hey, boys and girls, it's story time. Come and sit on, Gangster Man's lap and let me tell you about the hard times of the penitentiary and making mistakes. And you don't do that. The gangster doesn't do that, right? The way that he does it is a lot more latent, right? Meaning it's not so direct. The educational relationship between the young black man and the young black boys, to be specific, the 7-year-old boys looking up to the gangsters in the hood, is not one that's explicit, right? It's implicit. Just watch what I do. Just watch what I do, right? If I'm going to educate this next population of young black men, it's not going to be in what I tell you to do. It's going to be how I conduct myself as a gangster, right? I'm not going to have anybody tell me what to do as a grown man. Believe that. No one's going to tell me what to do, right? And on a personal level, on an academic level, as Jason Campbell, then it's like, that makes sense, right? As an academic, they're not going to tell me how I should be an academic. Academics wear elbow pads and leather. Academics wear, penny loafers and ties every day. That's not me. If that's what it has to be, if I'm forced to fit into some particular genre, then this goes back to my initial video on being inauthentic. You're fake, right? So the gangster, as gangster, is not going to go over there because it's not in his nature to say, hey, you little boy, don't make the mistakes, right? Because what does Big Mike say? I'll be making my own decisions. She knows. Mom knows I'll be making my own decisions. So if mom knows I'm going to be making my own decisions in a few years because I'm emulating these gangsters and I'm trying to clock cash and come up fast, you don't think the gangsters know? Of course the gangsters know. So every adult in the community then, the mom and the gangsters, the home and society, or you can even break it down deeper, right? That which is sort of relegated to the private sector being mom, because Big Mike talks about his relationship as a 7-year-old with his mother, his fictional mother, right? In the private sector, but also the public sector, right? Where the gangsters roam, right? The gangsters see the young boy watching them, right? So the gangster has this particular swag and he keeps his hat a certain way. He drinks his liquor a certain way. He holds his cigarette a certain way. He walks a certain way. He talks a certain way. Why? Because in doing that, he knows he's educating the young kids, right? He's educating the young kids on what it is to be gangster, how to hold yourself, how to act. And you can see this in some young kids, right? You look at some young kids, you're like, this kid's amazing. How did he learn that at such a young age, right? The problem is that there is no moral. There is no moral to the story. And that's a hard pill to swallow, right? On a deeper level, it's devoid of morality, right? The education, this ghetto education on how to be gangster is fundamentally devoid, lacking morality. There isn't a good versus bad, a right versus wrong, right? What's good becomes contextualized, right? The good become the gangsters. The bad become the police, right? The cops, the authority. And people think to themselves, well, is that the way that we should raise our children? Is that what the ghetto's all about? The claim is, listen, this is not what it ought to be, right? Or what it should be like. This is not a claim. What Big Mike is discussing is not prescriptive, right? He's not telling you what things ought to be or what things should be. It's descriptive, right? He's telling you the way things are. In the ghetto, in the projects, in the hood, this is what gangster means. I'm not here to tell you the way it ought to be or should be. I'm simply sort of taking notes, like I'm a journalist, man on the street, looking out in the ghetto, and what do I see? I see this young kid. Who's the young kid looking at? He's looking at the OG. What's the OG doing to teach him? Nothing. What's the OG doing? The OG's just doing him. The OG, however, recognizes on a deeper level that the kid's watching him. So insofar as the kid's watching him, he gives the kid social cues, right? And that's a technical term, actually, right? He gives the kid social cues. And the kid learns from these social cues without actually being taught. So it's a dance, right? And I could actually, now that I think about it, do a whole pedagogy hip-hop, right? But it's like pedagogy being a way that you teach people, right? It's a way, and my entire master's thesis was on pedagogy, instruction, how you educate someone, right? And I'm an epistemologist, right? I guess by profession. I'm interested in how you learn. So it's a way of like implicit learning, right? Hip hop has a really weird way too deep for this particular video for me to get in now that I start to really think about it, right? But it's a way of teaching the next generation without explicitly teaching the next generation. You're teaching through a recognition of observation, right? You know they're going to be like you, but you're not being preachy with it, right? And a quick example of how this unfolds in hip-hop history was the classic debate between, probably the greatest battle between Jay-Z and Nas, right? And Jay-Z was relentless with his critique. I think Nas beat him, though I love Jay. I think Nas got him with Ether. But one of Jay-Z's critiques of Nas was that Nas was just being too preachy, right? You're just like, yo, gangsters don't want to hear all that, right? We came from Africa and we did this and knowledge and consciousness. Like when you listen to hip-hop music, unless you're into that particular niche of hip-hop music, which, I am on some days, you're just like, nah, I ain't trying to hear that. I don't want to hear you preaching to me about, going back to the motherland and, saving the population. I want to listen to what? Gangsta music, right? Gangsta music. And the question is, what is that gangsta music? That gangsta music, right, is changed, right? Because people have conflated the idea of what Big Mike was talking about, being gangster. How is that gangster, right? The name of the track is called Straight Gangsterism. If you haven't listened to Straight Gangsterism, stop this YouTube video right now. Put in Straight Gangsterism. Go buy a copy. Go buy 15 copies of it. Listen to the track and then, unpause the video and pick up from where I'm left off, right? There's nothing in there talking about hoes or pimping or drugs or killing. He doesn't talk about anything at all like that in that verse. And it's the most gangster verse ever. Hip-hop, on an extremely deep level now, hip-hop has taken the term gangster to mean really gangster. Like it was some like Goodfellas, Untouchables, Al Capone type, gangster has become gangster. So what's gangsta is like shooting a guy and blowing his brains out and throwing up your set and, killing people. That's become that's not gangster. That's not gangster at all. That's violence, right? All you're really doing is you're just being violent. But you're not being gangster, right? When I say something's gangster, when I say I'm gangster and I think that I am gangster, I don't mean I'm that. I'm not violent, right? I have no interest in that, right? Gangster is Big Mike. The name of the track is called Straight Gangsta. It's like a how to be gangster. And he doesn't talk about that. So what is it that we're missing in the community, in hip hop, right? What Big Mike is saying, I think at least, in the track is that, look, being gangster is about understanding the obligations that you have, right? It's super complicated, right? All the rappers make the same claim and they're all right. Listen, I'm not a role model. Jay-Z will tell you he's not a role model. Diddy will tell you he's not a role model. Yo, it's all about, what's Diddy's drink? Ciroc. Diddy's pushing Ciroc. Jay-Z's pushing his drink. Like people, they pushing their drinks. But they pushing their drinks to a community of adults. So, I mean, what's the problem, right? Everybody else does it. They can't do it. Of course they can do it, right? But I'm not. The gangster knows that he's not to be emulated. Don't look up to me, little man. You know what I'm saying? You can watch me, but you need to figure it out yourself because you're going to have to make that decision, right? My mama understood that it was in my blood, right, doing this is in my blood. It's part of this, what's known as social determination, right? It's I'm in a sense in criminality and sort of like criminology theory. There's this idea of sort of social determination that if you have a community wherein families are habitually incarcerated, family members are habitually addicted to drugs, then it's only natural that the next generation of people born into that community will show traits of the same behavior. They're going to become institutionalized, they're going to end up on drugs, they're going to have a sort of proclivity towards violence and so on and so forth, right? What Big Mike is saying is that, listen, he's leaving the decision up to the audience member, to the person with the headphones on. You listen to straight gangsterism, right? He's like, yo, I was a young kid, I was looking up to the gangsters, and mom knew she couldn't really change it, and me and my cousin were going to be just like them, and it was in my blood, but, you know, mom would have to worry about me. He's not talking about you, he's talking about himself. The question is, how are you going to act, right? The question is, how are you going to manifest gangster, right? Are you going to be the type that manifests gangster by really believing naively, really naively, that gangster is really about killing people? Is that what you really think? That's the complexity with which a black man like Big Mike, that's as complex as his mind gets. His mind is only so complex insofar as really what he's talking about is what he's talking about, killing people. I think Big Mike is far more intelligent than that. I know he's far more intelligent than that because he didn't talk about killing and violence in that verse. What he's saying is that being gangster is a way of life, right? It's about being who you are, right? About understanding the right and the wrongs that you've done in life and not living your life basically for anybody else but yourself, right? Because in the end, we're born alone and we die alone. So the gangster recognizes that he's born alone and he dies alone, right? All I can do is I could just do me. And if you see things in me that you want to be like, then hey, more power to you. If you see things in me that you cannot stand and you want to be not like that, more power to you. But you, in a sense, need to be accountable for your own action. You can't then say, oh, I was looking at the gangsters and it was their fault, right? Right? That's what the original interpretation meant, right? When I said in the beginning of this video, it's not about accountability. It's not about the gangsters coming back and saying, hey, it's story time, young boys and girls. Let me tell you how life was so wrong for me and you shouldn't be like that. Nah, it's not about that. It's about the only way that you'll learn right from wrong, what you ought to do, who you are as a man, especially a young black man, is if you go out there and make the decision for yourself. You can watch me, but don't be me. I have no problem with you watching me, right? But don't try and be like I am, because you are not coming up in the same social environment that will construct a Big Mike. Big Mike uniquely came up in a social environment that led him to create that masterpiece verse, right? I know for a fact, with all the training that I had, I could never write a verse like that. I mean, it's profound, right? It's rap art, as far as I'm concerned. So the idea of being gangsta on that level is twofold, right? It's about an implicit, not explicit, mode of teaching this next generation of gangsters, future gangsters. But it's also a recognition that when we talk about this idea of gangster, we in no sense mean violence, right? What we mean is gangster is just you being you doing what you need to do, right? It's a recognition that there's a cycle of information that's passed from the older generation to the younger generation, but in a very masterful way, right? In a very masterful way, which stays true to the African American tradition of being one rooted in oral tradition, right? The tradition of African American communities has never really been one of sort of grammatical and written history. It's not, and not to say completely, but sort of generally speaking, it's not a written history. It's always, even from indigenous times, it's been an oral tradition, and African Americans and blacks in general, to be general, still carry on this oral tradition. The key is, and the point is that all the gems, right, are in the lyrics. So just like someone would do, and not even someone, just like I do research, like really heady analytic research by opening up books and cross-referencing argumentation and referring to secondary sources and primary sources, Well, in the African American community, in the hip hop, we didn't put that information in text. We did not put that information in text. So for all of you trying to understand hip hop in text, you're wasting your time, right? I might one day put all of this stuff that I'm putting up on YouTube in text, maybe, maybe not, doesn't really matter. But what I have done is I've taken time doing the same type of analysis, but I'm listening rather than reading. Because the clues are in text, right? Because the clues, the what's known as sort of existential account, the phenomenological, the lived experience of these people, hasn't been sort of translated, transcribed, or preserved in text. It's preserved in verse. So what Big Mike's talking about being gangster really is what gangster's about. It's not this new fictitious gangster, everybody killing everybody, right? Any idiot can pick up a microphone and talk about, I'm going to blow your brains out, I'm going to do a drive-by, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to rape you, I'm going to murder you. Any idiot can do that. Anybody can do that. I'm not impressed at all with verses where it's like, yo, shoot him up, kill him. I am super impressed. Listen to Big Mike's verse on straight gangsterism. Do that. That'll impress me, right? You be able to tell a verse, to be able to talk about a situation of a young black kid and how he's determined almost. And watch the dual sense of determined. He's determined insofar as his goals are set, right? He's willing to grind to get to that level. But he's determined insofar as he's just another domino in a chain. So determined in both sense. He's determined to become that gangster. Think about that, right? Think about that. Right? I'll say that again. He's determined in both senses to become that gangster. That's what Big Mike said in that verse. That's not me being heady, doing a big PhD analysis on the verse. Big Mike said that. All I'm doing is telling you what he said, right? He must have known what he said because he crafted the whole thing. And it's coherent, right? So the point is, this ain't me bringing anything to it. The only thing that I'm doing is exposing y'all to it. It's in the music, right? You just got to be able to decipher what I would say is really exceptionally masterful hip-hop from, poppy, sort of, we're going to kill everybody, the world's going to come to an end, let's do drive-bys, crap like that. That's not gangster. And that's it. There's no need to get more heady than that. I would strongly urge you, if you haven't listened to straight gangsterism, to go cop it. Don't bootleg it. And they ain't paying me for it, right? But go listen to it because it's an epic track on how to be gangster and what gangster is. And if more of us were like that, if more of the older generation assumed the responsibility of allowing someone to live their own life and leading really by example, then a lot of the problems would dissipate. But everybody believes that being gangster is about killing people and going to jail and getting stripes, and it's really not, right? It's about being real to who you are, whoever that may be, whatever talents you may have or not have. And to Big Mike, kudos to you, bruh, because you killed it. On that note, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch the third installment on the philosophy of hip-hop, how to be gangster, and thanks a lot. Tune in for video 4. All right, goodbye.